wrong. I closed the door slowly behind me and looked around. "Mom?" I called out. No answer. That was strange. She always responded immediately, even if she was in another room. "Dad?" I tried again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. A cold feeling started creeping into my chest. I took a few steps forward. The house looked exactly the same. Clean, organized, nothing out of place. But that silence, it didn't belong there. "Mom?" I called again, now walking faster. My heart started beating harder with every step. I reached the living room, and that's when I saw them. For a second, my brain refused to understand what I was looking at. They were both on the floor, not moving, not reacting, just lying there, completely still. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice suddenly weak. I rushed toward her, dropping my bag without even realizing it. My hands were shaking as I knelt beside her and touched her face. Cold. Too cold. "Dad, wake up!" I shouted, turning toward him, my voice breaking. Nothing. No movement, no response. Panic hit me all at once. "No, no, 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 no," I kept repeating, my hands trembling as I tried to shake them gently. "Please, wake up, please." But it was like they couldn't hear me at all. My breathing became uneven, my chest felt tight. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, almost dropping it as I tried to unlock it. I dialed emergency services. "Please, please come quickly," I said, my voice barely steady. "My parents, they're not waking up. I don't know what's wrong. Please hurry." Every second after that felt like forever. I kept calling their names, I kept trying to wake them, I kept hoping, begging that they would move, that they would say something. But they didn't. The silence stayed, and it was terrifying. When the ambulance finally arrived, everything turned into chaos. Paramedics rushed inside, checking pulses, giving instructions, moving fast. I stepped back, unable to think clearly, watching everything happen like I wasn't even there. They lifted my parents onto stretchers, placing oxygen masks on them as they rushed them out. I followed without saying a word, my heart racing, my mind completely blank. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know why they were like that. All I knew was that something was terribly wrong. And when the doctor came out, everything changed. I thought it was an accident, but it wasn't. The moment we reached the ICU, everything moved too fast. Nurses rushed in with stretchers, doctors started shouting instructions I couldn't even understand. Machines beeped loudly as they pushed my parents through the emergency doors. "Please, save them," I said, my voice shaking. "Please." But no one stopped. No one had time to answer me. The doors of the ICU closed right in front of me, and just like that, I was left outside, alone. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at those closed doors, trying to make sense of what was happening. My hands were still shaking, my heart wouldn't slow down. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. Every time someone in a white coat walked by, I looked up, hoping they would say something, anything, but they all just kept moving. I tried calling my brother. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. "Pick up, please pick up," I whispered, holding the phone tightly, but the call just kept ringing. I lowered my hand slowly, my chest tightening with every passing second. What was happening? Why weren't they waking up? Why was no one telling me anything? Finally, after what felt like forever, the ICU doors opened. A doctor stepped out. I rushed toward him immediately. "How are they? Are they okay?" He looked at me for a moment, his expression serious, too serious. "They are alive," he said. For a split second, I felt relief, but it didn't last. "Their condition is critical." My stomach dropped. "What happened to them? Why are they like this?" The doctor hesitated for just a moment and then said the words that changed everything. "They've been poisoned." I froze. "Poisoned?" I repeated, barely able to speak. He nodded. Yes, it appears to be a toxic substance. We're running more tests, but there's no doubt it was poisoning. My legs felt weak. I had to grab onto the wall to steady myself. No, 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 I kept repeating, my hands trembling as I tried to shake them gently. Please, wake up, please. But it was like they couldn't hear me at all. My breathing became uneven. My chest felt tight. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, almost dropping it as I tried to unlock it. I dialed emergency services. Please, please come quickly, I said, my voice barely steady. My parents, they're not waking up. I don't know what's wrong. Please hurry. Every second after that felt like forever. I kept calling their names. I kept trying to wake them. I kept hoping, begging that they would move, that they would say something. But they didn't. The silence stayed, and it was terrifying. When the doctor finally left the ICU, I finally had a moment to think clearly. But my mind went completely blank. What had happened in that house? I thought it was an accident. Maybe someone broke in, maybe it was a robbery gone wrong. But then I remembered the house. The door wasn't broken. Nothing was forced open. Everything inside looked normal, exactly the way it always did. And most importantly, nothing was missing. No valuables gone, no signs of struggle, no mess. It was as if whoever did this walked in, did what they came for, and left without disturbing anything. A slow, uneasy realization started forming in my mind. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. This was planned, and whoever did it had access. I felt a chill run through my body. Only a few people ever came into that house. My parents were very careful about that. They didn't trust outsiders easily. They didn't order food from outside. They didn't let strangers in, which meant one thing. Whoever gave them that poison was someone they knew, someone they trusted. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. Family, close relatives, people who could walk in without question. I didn't want to think that way. I didn't want to go there. But the more I thought about it, the more everything pointed in that direction. And then another thought crossed my mind. My brother. A week ago, he had called me. He told me he was going on a trip with his wife, out of the country, for a few days. He even reminded me to visit our parents while they were alone. At the time, it felt normal. But now it felt different. I pulled out my phone again and stared at his name on the screen. He still hadn't answered any of my calls. Not one. A strange feeling settled deep inside my chest. The timing, the silence, the situation. It didn't add up. I shook my head slightly, trying to push the thought away. No, it can't be, I whispered to myself. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the more I thought about it, the less sense my brother's trip made. Why weren't they answering? I stared at my phone, my brother's name still on the screen. I pressed call again. Ringing, ringing, ringing. No answer. I ended the call and tried again immediately, my fingers trembling. Come on, pick up, I whispered under my breath. Nothing. The call went unanswered again. A tight knot started forming in my chest. This wasn't like him. Even if he was busy, even if he was traveling, he would at least send a message, something, anything. But there was nothing. No missed calls returned, no texts, no explanation. I quickly went to my contacts and tapped on my sister-in-law's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Still nothing. I swallowed hard and tried again, and again. Each time, the silence on the other end felt louder. Why aren't they answering? I said out loud, my voice shaking now. It didn't make sense. If they were on a trip, they should have their phones. If they were busy, they would at least respond later. But this complete silence felt wrong, very wrong. I started pacing the corridor, my heartbeat getting faster with every passing second. My thoughts were racing, jumping from one possibility to another, none of them making sense. Maybe something happened to them. Maybe they didn't know yet. Or maybe they were ignoring me? That thought stopped me in my tracks. Ignoring me? No, why would they do that? I shook my head, trying to calm myself. You're overthinking, I muttered. They probably just don't have signal, or they're asleep, or busy. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it, because deep down, something didn't feel right. I looked down at my phone again, my fingers hovering over the call button. Should I try again? Or was I missing something obvious? And that's when a disturbing thought hit me. He sounded worried, but something felt rehearsed. My phone finally rang. I looked down at the screen and my heart skipped a beat. It was him. I answered immediately. Where are you? Why weren't you answering? I've been calling you for hours. There was a short pause on the other end. Then his voice came, rushed and tense. What happened? I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. They're in the hospital. Mom and Dad. They're unconscious. What? He said loudly. How? What are you talking about? I whispered. They've been poisoned. Another pause, longer this time. That's not possible, he said quickly. Are you sure? I closed my eyes, trying to hold myself together. That's what the doctor said. He exhaled sharply. We're coming back, right now. The call ended. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at my phone. My heart was still racing, but something about the call stayed with me. His reaction. It sounded right. It sounded worried, but something didn't sit well. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the pauses. Maybe it was the way he repeated my words. Or maybe it was just my mind overthinking everything. A few hours later, he arrived at the hospital with his wife. They rushed in, both of them looking panicked. His wife's eyes were already filled with tears, and his face was tight with concern. What happened? He asked, walking straight toward me. How did this happen? I don't know, I said, my voice low. I found them like that. His wife covered her mouth, shaking her head. Oh my God, who would do something like this? We all stood there silent for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down on us. He looked toward the ECU doors, his jaw tightening. They were fine when we left, he said softly. Completely fine. When did you last talk to them? I asked. A few days ago, he answered without hesitation. Everything was normal. His wife nodded quickly. Yes, they sounded okay. I watched them carefully. Everything they were saying made sense. Everything felt normal. And yet, there was something in his eyes I couldn't fully understand. Not fear, not shock, something else. Something I couldn't name. But I didn't question it. Not then. Because at that moment, all I could think about were my parents. But I didn't realize then that he already knew. Everything pointed away from him. The police arrived later that day. 2 officers walked into the hospital corridor, their expressions serious, their movements calm and controlled. One of them took out a notebook as they approached us. We need to ask a few questions, he said. I nodded quickly. Of course. They started with the basics. Who lives in the house? My parents and my brother with his wife, but they were out of the country. The officer wrote it down. When did you last see your parents? Not recently, I said. That's why I went to surprise them. He nodded, then looked at my brother. When did you leave for your trip? About a week ago, my brother answered without hesitation. We flew out together. Do you have proof of travel? Yes, he said quickly. Tickets, bookings, everything. I can show you. He pulled out his phone and started going through it, showing emails, confirmations, even photos from the trip. His voice stayed steady. His answers were clear. Too clear. The officers checked everything carefully. The timeline matched. The dates aligned perfectly. There were no gaps, no confusion. Everything looked clean. Was there any sign of forced entry? the officer asked me. No, I said. The house was exactly the same. Nothing broken, nothing missing. He exchanged a glance with his partner. No robbery, no break-in, he murmured, writing something down. They continued asking questions about visitors, routines, food, habits, but nothing unusual came up. No strangers, no recent conflicts, no obvious suspects. After a while, one of the officers closed his notebook and looked at all of us. We are treating this as a poisoning case. We will investigate further. I nodded slowly, but my mind was still racing. From everything they had seen, from everything they had checked, my brother looked completely innocent. Perfect timeline, perfect alibi, perfect answers. I glanced at him for a moment. He stood there quietly, his face serious, his posture calm. There was nothing to point at, nothing to question, nothing to prove otherwise. And that's what made it worse, because if it wasn't him, then who? The officers left soon after that, and the corridor fell silent again. But something didn't sit right with me, because the truth wasn't in what we saw, it was in what we missed. The more time passed, the more something felt wrong. Days started blending into each other. Morning turned into night, and night turned into another long, exhausting day at the hospital. My parents were still in critical condition. Machines surrounded them, their steady beeping the only sign that they were still alive. I spent most of my time sitting outside their room, staring through the glass, hoping, waiting for any sign of improvement. Relatives came and went. Some stayed for hours. Some just stopped by, offering quiet prayers and worried looks. Everyone asked the same question, "Any update?" And every time, the answer was the same, "No." My brother and his wife were there almost all the time. At first, it felt comforting. He stayed close, spoke to doctors, handled paperwork, talked to relatives. He was doing everything a son should do. But slowly, I started noticing things, small things. The way he always seemed to already know what the doctors were going to say. The way he avoided certain questions, especially when it came to the days before the incident. Like she was trying not to say the wrong thing. I sat there one evening, my eyes fixed on the ICU doors, my mind racing again. Nothing was adding up. Everything looked normal on the surface. But underneath, something wasn't right. And then my husband came and sat beside me. He stayed quiet for a moment, just looking ahead. Then he said something that made my heart stop for a second. And then my husband said something that changed everything. This didn't come from outside. My husband sat beside me that evening, his eyes fixed ahead, his expression unusually serious. He had been observing everything quietly for the past few days, saying very little but thinking a lot. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. I nodded, too exhausted to question anything. He leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice. "I've been reviewing everything, the timeline, the hospital reports, the police questions." I looked at him, waiting. "There's something that doesn't fit," he continued. "No forced entry, no robbery, no signs of a struggle. That rules out an outsider." I stayed silent, listening carefully. "If someone from outside had done this," he said, "there would be some trace, a break-in, a disturbance, something missing. But there's nothing." He paused for a moment, then looked at me directly. "This didn't come from outside." The words hit me slowly. "Then what are you saying?" I asked. He took a breath before answering. "The only people who had access to your parents' daily life are the ones who live with them or visit them regularly." My heart started beating faster. "Which means," he continued, "the poison didn't have to be forced in. It could have been added to something they consume regularly, something they trust." I frowned slightly. "Their food?" He nodded. "Or anything they use daily without suspicion, something routine, something predictable." I tried to process what he was saying, but they don't eat outside food. They're very careful. They don't let strangers in. Exactly, he said, which makes it even more important to look at their internal environment, their habits, their routine. He leaned back slightly, thinking. If the poison was slow acting, he added, then it wouldn't show immediate symptoms. It would build up over time. That means repeated exposure, not a one-time incident. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Repeated exposure, I repeated quietly. He nodded, which only makes sense if the source is something they consume or interact with every day. I looked at him, my mind slowly connecting the dots. Daily routine, trusted environment, repeated contact, something inside the house. My hands began to tremble slightly. He stood up after a moment, looking towards the hospital room. Whatever happened, he said quietly, it didn't start outside. He turned back to me, which meant it was already inside the house. There was only one thing they never skipped. After hearing my husband's theory, I couldn't stop thinking about their daily routine. I sat quietly, going through everything I remembered about my parents' habits, trying to find a pattern, something consistent, something repeated every day without fail. My husband sat beside me, also thinking. Let's break it down, he said. Start from their mornings. I nodded slowly. My mother always wakes up early. She prepares breakfast, checks on the house, and then my father usually sits in the kitchen while eating. He listened carefully. They keep things simple, I continued. They don't order food, they don't eat out. Almost everything they consume is prepared at home. Who usually prepares their meals? He asked. My mother, I replied, most of the time. He nodded. And does anyone else help? I said after a pause, sometimes my sister-in-law would help. She lives there too, so she's around the kitchen. He didn't react, but I noticed he was paying attention. We both stayed quiet for a moment, letting the information settle. Then he asked, is there anything they consume every single day without exception? I thought about it. Breakfast, tea, lunch, dinner. Nothing unusual so far, but then something clicked. Yes, I said slowly, there is one thing. He looked at me immediately. What is it? Every morning, I said, they eat the same homemade item. My mother always keeps it in the kitchen, and my father takes it daily without fail. What is it? He asked again. A specific food item, I replied, my voice lowering slightly. Something they trust completely. It's been part of their routine for years. He leaned forward. And no one questions it. No, I said. It's just always there. We both fell silent again. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If something was being introduced repeatedly, it had to be through something consistent, something no one would question, something familiar, something normal, something they would never doubt. My heart started beating faster. Could it really be that simple? Was the answer hidden in something so ordinary that no one ever thought to question it? I stood up slowly, feeling a strange mix of fear and urgency. We need to check it, I said. My husband nodded. Without wasting time, we decided to go back to the house. The thought of entering that place again made me uneasy, but I knew we had no choice. Because if the theory was right, the truth was somewhere inside that routine, inside something they used every day. And when we checked it, my heart stopped. The house looked normal, but it didn't feel safe anymore. When we arrived, everything appeared exactly the same as before. The door, the rooms, the furniture, nothing had changed. It was quiet, clean, and still. But to me, it felt different, heavier, unsettling. I stood at the entrance for a moment before stepping inside. My hand instinctively tightened around my bag as I looked around the hallway. This is the same place, I said quietly, more to myself than to anyone else. My husband didn't respond immediately. He stepped in behind me, his eyes scanning the surroundings with focus. No hesitation, no distractions, just observation. We moved slowly through the house, passing the living room where I found my parents unconscious. I paused briefly at that spot, my chest tightening as the memory rushed back. I closed my eyes for a second, then continued walking. My husband, however, didn't stop. He walked straight ahead, past the hallway, past the living room, heading directly toward the kitchen, as if he already knew where to go. I followed him. The kitchen looked untouched. Everything was in place, utensils arranged neatly, cabinets closed, nothing out of order. He stepped inside and began looking around carefully. He opened one cabinet, then another, slowly, methodically. I stood near the doorway, watching him, my anxiety growing with every second. "What are you looking for?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he continued checking drawers, shelves, and storage areas. His movements were precise, almost as if he was searching for something specific rather than just exploring. After a few moments, he stopped. He turned toward one particular cabinet and stared at it for a second longer than the others. Then he reached for it. My heart began to beat faster. "This one?" I asked, stepping closer. He didn't respond. He simply placed his hand on the handle and pulled it open slowly. Inside were a few neatly arranged items, nothing that seemed unusual at first glance. But he didn't stop there. He reached further in, moving things aside, searching deeper than before. I watched closely, my breath tightening without realizing it. "What is it?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look at me. He just kept moving things aside inside the cabinet. Then, suddenly, he paused. His expression changed slightly, and he reached for something hidden behind the rest. My stomach dropped. Then he opened something I wish he hadn't. They trusted this every single day. My husband pulled out a jar from the cabinet and held it in his hands. It looked completely ordinary, a simple household item, something that could be found in any kitchen. Nothing about it appeared suspicious at first glance. "This one?" I asked, stepping closer. He nodded slowly. "Your parents used this daily, right?" he asked. I looked at the jar carefully, trying to remember, and then it hit me. "Yes," I said quietly, "every morning, without fail." My stomach tightened. It was part of their routine, something so normal, so familiar that no one ever questioned it. My mother kept it stocked, and my father consumed it regularly as part of his meals. My husband placed the jar on the counter and opened it. The lid came off with a soft sound. He didn't rush, he didn't react, he simply observed it carefully, inspecting the contents. I stood there, watching, my thoughts racing. "Could something really be inside this?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted the jar slightly, examining the texture and contents from different angles. "Think about it," he said calmly. "If something was being introduced repeatedly, it would have to be through something consistent, something they never questioned." I nodded slowly, my mind aligning with his reasoning. I felt a strange mix of shock and relief at the same time. Shock because I had never known this. Relief because if what he said was true, then there might actually be something that could help us understand what happened. "Do you mean they recorded everything?" I asked. "Not everything," he replied, "but enough to capture important areas of the house, including the kitchen." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I checked earlier," he said, "and there's recorded footage." My heart began to beat faster. "You have it?" I asked quickly. "Yes," he said. I stepped closer without realizing it. "Then show me," I said, my voice barely steady. He nodded and opened a file on his phone. After a brief moment, he handed it to me. "Play it," he said. My fingers trembled slightly as I held the phone. For a second, I hesitated. I didn't know what I was about to see. Part of me wasn't ready. But I pressed play. The screen lit up. The kitchen appeared on the display. The same kitchen I was standing in now, but from a different angle, captured days earlier. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. At first, everything looked normal. Empty kitchen, quiet environment, no movement. Then the door in the footage opened, and someone walked in. My breath caught in my throat. It was my brother. He looked calm, completely normal, like nothing was wrong. He walked inside, followed by his wife. They were talking casually, their expressions relaxed, their movements natural. For a moment, nothing seemed unusual. Then my eyes stayed fixed on the screen, because I had a feeling something was about to happen, and when the video started, everything fell apart. That's when I saw it, the moment everything changed. In the video, my brother finally moved again after scanning the room. He stepped closer to the counter where the jar was placed, the same item we had been discussing earlier. My breathing slowed as I watched closely. He reached for the jar. There was no hesitation now, no confusion, just quiet, controlled movement. He picked it up and held it for a second, glancing once more toward the surroundings. Then his wife stepped closer to him, as if already aware of what was about to happen. She didn't ask questions, she didn't stop him. Instead, she calmly reached into her hand and took out something small, a packet. My eyes widened slightly. I leaned even closer to the screen without realizing it. She handed it to him. He took it without any visible reaction, no fear, no urgency, just a quiet exchange between two people who clearly understood what they were doing. My heart started pounding faster. He opened the jar, slowly, carefully. Then he looked around one more time. A brief pause, a final check. My stomach tightened. And then he began pouring the contents of the small packet into the jar. The movement was steady, controlled, almost practiced. There was no shaking, no hesitation, no visible guilt, just a calm, deliberate act. His wife stood beside him, watching closely. She didn't interfere, she didn't react. She simply observed, making sure everything was done properly. My hands began to tremble as I watched the screen. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. They both worked together, silently, coordinating every step. After pouring the contents in, he used a utensil to mix it gently, ensuring it blended in completely. Then he closed the jar again, tightening the lid as if nothing had happened. No rushed movements, no signs of panic. Everything was done with quiet precision. He placed the jar back in its original position, exactly where it had been before. His wife adjusted a nearby item slightly, as if to make sure the scene looked untouched. Then both of them stepped back. They exchanged a brief look. No words were needed. After that, they walked out of the kitchen calmly, just like they had entered. The video continued for a few more seconds with an empty kitchen again. Normal, silent, unchanged. But nothing felt normal to me anymore. My breathing became uneven as I slowly lowered the phone. My mind couldn't process what I had just seen. The evidence was clear, undeniable. My brother, the same person I trusted, the same person who called me, the same person who asked me to visit our parents. And now I had seen it with my own eyes. I turned to my husband, my voice barely coming out. And in that second, I lost my brother forever. This wasn't a mistake. It was planned. I stood there in silence, still replaying the footage in my mind. The image of my brother and his wife calmly carrying out what they had done refused to leave me. It wasn't a moment of confusion or anger. It was calculated, controlled, intentional. My husband spoke quietly beside me, breaking the silence. "Now it makes sense," he said. I looked at him, still trying to hold myself together. "What do you mean?" He took a slow breath before answering. The timeline, the trip, the timing of the poisoning, it wasn't random. He pointed toward the direction of the living room, as if organizing the events in his mind. They created distance first, he continued. By leaving the country, they established an alibi, something solid, something that would remove suspicion from them immediately. I listened, my chest tight. While they were away, he said, the poison was already being administered gradually. That's why your parents didn't show immediate symptoms. It built up over time. Slow poison, repeated exposure, daily consumption. It all connected now. They didn't need to be physically present every time, he added. Once the substance was introduced into something your parents consumed regularly, the process would continue without them being there. I felt a wave of realization hit me. So the trip was just to make themselves look innocent? I asked. He nodded. Exactly. It gave them distance, time, and an explanation for their absence when things would eventually be discovered. My mind started piecing everything together. The routine, the trust, the consistent exposure, the hidden cameras, the calm behavior in the footage. None of it was accidental. Every step had a purpose. Every move had been planned in advance. They chose something predictable, my husband said. Something your parents would use daily without suspicion. That's what allowed them to carry this out without raising immediate alarms. I looked down at my hands, still shaking slightly. And the reason, I whispered. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Property, inheritance. What would happen if my parents were no longer in the picture? Everything pointed toward a clear motive now, a motive that explained why they were so careful, why they maintained appearances, why they acted normal even when carrying out something so serious. Because from their perspective, it was working. They believed no one would ever suspect them. They thought the alibi, the planning, and the slow execution would protect them completely. And they thought they had gotten away with it. There was no escaping the truth now. We didn't wait any longer. The footage, the jar, the pattern, the timeline, everything we had gathered was handed over to the authorities. My husband contacted the police again, this time with clear evidence that changed the entire direction of the case. When the officers reviewed the video, their expressions shifted. What had once been a case of uncertainty now turned into something far more serious. They asked questions, verified details, and began coordinating immediately. Statements were taken again, this time with the evidence in hand. The tone was different, more focused, more urgent. Within hours, a team was dispatched to locate my brother and his wife. I wasn't present when they were found, but I was informed shortly after. They were brought in for questioning. The atmosphere during their arrest was not chaotic, but controlled, professional. The officers approached them with the evidence already established. There was no need for confusion or speculation. When confronted, my brother's reaction was not dramatic. There were no loud denials, no attempts to argue against what had already been documented. The footage spoke for itself. The timeline aligned, the evidence matched. His wife remained quiet during most of the process, offering no clear explanation. Their behavior, even in that moment, lacked the urgency one might expect from someone being accused of such a serious act. There was no escaping the truth now. The case had moved beyond assumptions. Everything was now grounded in verified evidence. Statements, recordings, and physical proof all pointed in the same direction. The officers secured the necessary formalities, ensuring both individuals were taken into custody according to procedure. The investigation—
"What happened to us?" he asked, his voice weak but steady enough to carry concern. I felt my throat tighten. This was the moment I had been dreading. Not the investigation, not the evidence, but this, explaining the truth to the very people who had gone through it. They looked at me with trust, with confusion, with the expectation that I would have answers. I took a small breath, trying to steady myself. They had no memory of the events that led them here, no awareness of what had caused their condition. To them, it was still a blank gap. My mind replayed everything: the footage, the discovery, the realization of who was responsible. And now I had to tell them. I looked into their eyes, feeling the weight of everything pressed down on me. Because when they asked who did it, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Some truths don't heal, they break you. I sat beside my parents' hospital bed, my voice trembling as I finally told them everything. I didn't hold back anymore. The words came out slowly at first, then all at once, each detail heavier than the last. I explained how I had found them unconscious, how the doctors confirmed poisoning, how the investigation led us to hidden cameras, and finally, how the footage revealed who was responsible. As I spoke, their expressions changed. Confusion turned into shock, shock turned into disbelief, and then silence. My mother's eyes filled with tears almost immediately. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to reject what she had just heard. "No," she whispered, "that can't be." My father remained still for a long moment, his face tightening as the truth settled in. His breathing became heavier, not from his condition, but from the emotional weight of the revelation. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "I saw it," I said, my voice breaking, "with my own eyes." The room felt unbearably heavy after that. No one spoke for a while. The reality of it was too difficult to process all at once. Later, as the case moved forward through legal proceedings, the evidence presented in court left no room for doubt. The footage, the timeline, the forensic confirmation, it all aligned clearly. The verdict followed based on the investigation and the proof provided. But for me, the outcome was never just about justice. It was about everything that came before it: the trust that had been broken, the family that would never feel the same again, the realization that someone so close could be capable of something so calculated. Even after my parents began recovering physically, the emotional impact remained. There were quiet moments in the hospital where no one spoke, moments where we all sat together but felt distant, moments where the past could not be ignored and the future felt uncertain. The house was no longer just a home, it became a place tied to memories we couldn't revisit without pain. Trust, once natural and effortless, now carried hesitation. My parents recovered slowly, but something had permanently changed within them, and within me. I replayed everything in my mind countless times, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand how something so devastating could come from within the family itself. But some questions had no satisfying answers, some wounds didn't close easily, and some truths stay with you forever. Because sometimes the people you trust the most destroy you the deepest.